This is going to be a 20-minute webcast, really going through what I consider some of the most important steps to really building out a data analytics strategy that's going to scale and make you successful going down this journey. So a little bit about me. My name is Eric MacDonald. I run a cloud transformation practice at Proterra. One of the main focuses that my team has is cloud migrations, app transformation, automation, and of course, data analytics. We're going to be going through a series of slides, and really the main thing I really want everyone to take away from this is that even if you don't have a strategy today, or maybe you have a strategy and maybe you already have a data analytics team and you're doing advanced things, this is still going to be a pretty good webcast for you to attend, just because it's going to show you some things that I've seen in the field that can help you go even further in that journey. So if there's one thing that I want everyone to take away from this webcast, is really this mission statement right here. I've seen so many businesses get caught up with the buzz, so to speak, to collect literally everything and anything possible without really even considering what they even want to do with that data, or even clearly defining what they're trying to solve. So throughout the presentation, you're going to see a common theme that I'll constantly repeat, and it's really going to be about what are you doing to ultimately support the business or the objective that you set forward in your strategy. So even again, if you have a strategy today, and maybe everyone's aligned, but if you've not clearly articulated and defined the goal or the challenge that you're trying to solve, this is a good place to start. So back to where we start seeing in the field, where I start to see a lot of friction. I'll give you some examples that I see on a week-to-week basis when I engage with customers, specifically about where they're at in their data analytics journey. I'll ask them, what are you actually trying to solve by collecting data? And I've heard answers from, well, we want to get more insights to specific application, or we want to be able to see some of these emerging trends. And then when I ask the team, who are the key stakeholders in the company or the leadership team, they're not clear on their objectives. And what I've also seen is that when you've not really clearly articulated or defined the problem that you're trying to solve, oftentimes the data that they are collecting isn't really valuable, or it's not really what is going to help them solve that unique business problem or challenge. So really, it doesn't really matter what you're collecting today. It really should be, if you're collecting something today, it really should be, is it solving the unique business challenge or objective that you put forth in your strategy? So it really starts from there first. So I always tell customers, a good strategy isn't really always about the data that you already have or what potentially can be available. It's, again, about how to achieve the business outcome that you're looking to achieve, and how can data help you get there. So that allows you to really start working backwards. So again, at a very high level, what are you trying to solve? And once you've articulated that and defined that, then you can start asking yourself questions on, let's work backwards and let's look at what data do we need to have in place to support that business challenge or objective that we're trying to solve for. So another, what I would consider best practice in the field that I've seen, and this happened just recently. We had a customer that was had a pretty advanced analytics play, to be honest. And one of the key things that I noticed with that customer was that they had a really good analytics team, but the stakeholders in the business didn't really know what the analytics team was doing, and that was kind of a red flag right there. And part of the reason why that was a red flag was that they were having issues with getting alignment on, getting more data from the business. And then being able to report on that and visualize that. So those two weren't in sync. And so I asked the question, in a conference room, I'm like, has leadership clearly articulated what you're actually trying to solve for? And, the answer was no. So we did a working backwards session and really laid out those high level milestones. And it was able to get both parties in sync and to help them accelerate past the frictions they were having. So a really good best practice that I would say to really keep in mind is your key stakeholders and your leadership team really should own the actual business strategy when it comes to data analytics. Once that's defined, again, you can start talking about the data that you need to have to support those outcomes ultimately. So once you've clearly defined what you're trying to solve for and you've worked backwards, and you've identified the data that you need to be able to solve that outcome, this is where you can start getting into collecting and organizing your data. So I'm going to go through a few examples, really high level, of just different cloud platforms that have what I would consider enterprise ready, near infinite scale, that is readily available to just about anyone. And it's going to be Azure, AWS, and GCP. So I'm going to go through just what a typical kind of data ingestion pipeline looks like. I am going to be using a lot of SAP examples, but this can be extended to just about anything. So if you have IoT data, if you have manufacturing equipment that you wanted to analyze or get insights to, this really could be just about anything. So I'm going to use the SAP example just because SAP is near and dear to Proterra. So again, if there is any questions, feel free to ask in the chat and I'll be able to answer those and we'll go through them. So the first one, when we look at just in general an Azure Synapse example, we're going to look at just what I would just consider source systems. So this diagram, very, very high level, just talks about just the overall workflow of how you get actual SAP data, into the cloud, specifically Synapse. So Synapse is effectively an all-in-one solution to be able to start doing data ingestion. You can immediately start doing enrichment of that data. You can do ETL, ELT. You can actually start getting to the point where you can start doing ML once you get further down the road. But the major thing here is that you have direct tie-ins and direct capabilities with Power BI to visualize that data. So the one thing that I've seen customers, do in the field is that they'll have struggles setting up the platform in a very cost secure and governed manner. Really, from a security perspective, once you've decided to take a lot of this data that could be very sensitive, whether that's financial data, intellectual property, you really want to make sure that you have a partner or staff that's trained appropriately, in the public cloud space when it comes to actually setting up your data in the hyperscaler environment. So from the security perspective, you don't ever want to be in a position to where you're setting up data and then accidentally you had a storage account that was publicly accessible, right? You see all the time in the news in the industry where a lot of these so-called breaches happen. Well, really what it comes down to is just misconfiguration. And a lot of it has to do with analytics, to be honest with you. So we see a lot of customers that will put that data in a data lake, which is a storage account. And there's times where, if they've accidentally exposed that data is out there. So it's super important when you're going through this journey, specifically, whether it's Azure or if it's AWS or GCP, they all have some very common platforms, and all holds true to all of them, where you want to make sure that that data is kept privately and securely. The other area that I see, customers tend to struggle with is just the amount of data ingestion that they think that they actually need. So, the reason why I talked, quite a bit about defining the business outcome or objective in that very first slide is I've seen customers just want to ingest every little piece of data they possibly have, and that cost gets ramped up significantly. And so what we'll do is we'll talk to those customers and really have a working backwards session and ask, like, hey, what actually are you guys trying to actually solve for, and what are you actually trying to achieve? And then we just focus on that core data set to be able to start getting into the platform. That typically will usually give someone a very, very cost-effective, very, very cost-effective platform to be able to effectively do low-code, no-code operations, to be able to start realizing this value that they have already, that they're heading down towards anyways. So AWS is very similar. Again, there's going to be a common theme, and you'll kind of see the reason why I kind of stitched these together is that if you look back on the Azure example, you had Power BI. That's obviously a part of the Microsoft suite. On the Synapse perspective, Power BI directly integrates with Synapse. So in real time, on some of your queries, you can do direct integrations right from Azure to be able to look at some of your data sets in real time. So it's super powerful. It's very well integrated, specifically from an Azure AD perspective, as well as security and governance. Very similar story also on the AWS side. AWS has what's called Amazon QuickSight, which is effectively the same thing as Power BI. What you'll see here, just again, the common theme here is you'll see that there's S4HANA, ECC, and BW data that is going into AWS, and you'll see that there's an ETL process, which is AWS Glue and Lambda. And you'll see that it's going to those storage accounts that I talked about. So again, a common theme that I always try to make sure that I work with customers on is that, once the platform gets up and running, making sure that you have the correct personnel and people that are trained in cloud, specifically to make sure that there's never, the company's never in a position where they've accidentally exposed sensitive data while you're trying to solve a business objective or problem. And so you'll see very similar here that there's also non-SAP applications, and then there's IoT devices as well. So just about everything out there now provides some level of data output that you can ingest. But I always will challenge a customer and say, do those data sets support, again, the business challenge that you're actually trying to solve for? GCP, very, very similar. What we've seen with Google, Google is very, very well known for their analytics. While I do feel that Azure and AWS have a very, very good analytics play, Google's been doing this for a long time, and they have a very elegant way of doing it as well. And that's usually driven through BigQuery. So just like AWS and Azure, there's very similar integrations that you can easily start ingesting data from different types of systems for SAP. And again, if it's non-SAP, it could be other areas as well. And one of the cool things I think about with that BigQuery specifically has and GCP has is that Google actually extends their ML models to you directly out of the box. Again, this would be more of the advanced operations of analytics, but the whole goal is that once you start doing this level of data ingestion and start actually be able to realize some business value and then solving those challenges that you clearly articulated and that define the business objective, then you can actually start getting to the point where you can start modeling this data to maybe potentially look at things that you're not aware of and be able to do predictive analysis on certain items. So once you get the data specifically into whatever platform you decide to go to, and there's pros and cons for both, or excuse me, for all three. The one thing I always do try to push customers is that even if you have a multi-cloud strategy, definitely rally around centralizing around one platform. And this really gets into the concept about having a very, very centralized data lake. It just makes it a lot easier for day-to-day operations, data manipulation, and then as well as once you start needing to prepare that data, whether that's from a changing perspective or enriching that data or doing some level of extraction and manipulation, it's much easier to do that in a central spot versus going between different platforms. So if you do have a multi-cloud strategy, I would still stress the importance of centralizing around at least one of those core platforms for your analytics play. Specifically just because it does become very complex when you start getting to scale, when we start talking about petabytes of data. So again, once you started collecting that data, now we start getting to the point where I would say this goes back to the business objective that you've articulated in that first section that we talked about, would be is how do we actually start visualizing the data based off of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve in our strategy. And really what this comes down to, and I'm going to show just a few different examples, this is really going to come down to Power BI, QuickSight, and AWS. Now, the one amazing thing about all three of these tools is that they're effectively drag and drop or low code, almost no code. In fact, some of these graphs were just automatically generated very, very easily without a lot of manipulation whatsoever. So, if you can kind of imagine it, even if you were just doing just specifically just data ingestion without doing any level of ETL or ELT, you can immediately start getting visual representation or visual value on maybe some of the financial data out of certain SAP systems with effectively very, very low effort. And then that can be shown to key stakeholders in the business or business decision makers who, are maybe, they want to see the data in a visual manner. I know for myself, I understand things much better when it's visually based versus just a spreadsheet and numbers. So this is also, Amazon QuickSight. We had a really good success story with a customer that, built some really, really neat graphs. And the person who did that had effectively almost no QuickSight experience, very, very little. And we helped them get really up and running. And this is just showing just a demo dashboard just directly from Amazon. But these are some of the things that you can start actually doing relatively pretty easy, quite honestly, right? So, one thing that I'll kind of go back to our first section that I kind of hammered on is that, an output or a dashboard like this, these items that you see here should be the things that you're looking to solve or gain insight on. That's how you would measure success, based off of the things that you've declared were important for the business to solve ultimately. Again, this is also, I wanted to show Google Data Studio as well. Very similar theme. They're all BI tools, all very intuitive. But again, just I go back to just the intuitiveness. Once you're able to actually define your mission statement, you're able to work backwards to find the data that you need to support that statement. You get the data ingested into the platform, and very quickly you're able to start having dashboards like this. And one of the coolest things that I think that Microsoft has done, I mean, quite honestly, all of them, was the ability to be able to have some level of self-service reporting and then automatic refreshes in that data in real time. So imagine if you wanted to look at this dashboard and it updates in real time based off of the automated process that you have on the platform side, doing a data set load or doing a refresh. So again, to be able to give the power to users, specifically users who are going to make business decisions, to me it's super intuitive and very elegant to be able to look at this data in real time. And again, one of the most I'd say the things I can stress the most is you don't necessarily need to be a coding expert to be able to get some of these outcomes that you're kind of seeing here today. So there is a question about, is there a specific platform that's best for data analytics, rather it being Azure, AWS, or GCP? I would say definitely, there's pros and cons to all of them for sure. I think from a point of entry perspective, that I do think Azure has an advantage with Synapse in general, and that's because they've invested pretty heavily just with all the integrations to just about anything from a data perspective that you can easily start ingesting. Now, you do have that capability in AWS and as well as Google. It's just not as straightforward, and there's a little bit more work that has to go into that. So I think that's probably one of the big pros on the Microsoft side of the house. Would definitely be that one. I've seen platforms work on different businesses in general, but the one thing that I always go back and stress is that just pick one, and one that maybe that the business is either comfortable with, or if you have a partner like Proterra that's comfortable in all three, we can help guide you on what's the right platform to use that's fit for use for that business. All right, thanks for joining our data intelligence webinar today. Look forward to hopefully speaking to some of you guys pretty soon. Have a good day.